He tried to stabilize my family company with a midnight prenup. The cameras and notary's ghost ring ruined everything. My name is Hannah Cole, and the day my wedding turned into a contract review began with a courier envelope that arrived already warm from the van. It lay on my kitchen island beside a bowl of lemons that have never once been squeezed, an unfamiliar weight in a room that usually measures life in coffee spoons and to-do lists. The return address wore my fiancé's firm like a lapel pin. Kinsit and Reed, Corporate Affairs, and the subject line through the plastic window performed confidence. Prenuptial agreement. Signature packet. The paper inside had that sharp, chemical scent of fresh toner, as if the pages had been printed while the courier waited at a humming machine that believed deadlines can bless anything. I should have been packing centerpieces into tidy stacks or texting my maid of honor about the problem of shoes that make you look brave. Instead, I stood under the skylight with a stack of clauses that introduced Colin Hart to me as if I hadn't known his posture for 2 years. He occupies space like an executive summary, clean, assertive, allergic to ambiguity. I met him on a Monday when a fire alarm evacuated our building and left us standing on the curb surrounded by coworkers who had never seen each other in daylight. He noted the number of floors we'd walked down and asked if I was okay without really waiting for my answer, which at the time I chose to interpret as competence. The document named me as a party and introduced my family's company as a character in our romance. Cole Orchard and Cold Storage is less poetic than people imagine. It is forklifts and spreadsheets, and the year the compressors died the same week Blossom dropped. It is also the reason our wedding venue wanted a deposit without a phone call. The prenup spoke in a voice that didn't bother with metaphor. It knew our asset map. It knew our contingency plans. It knew how many shares of voting stock I hold in a trust with a name so boring it disappears when you say it out loud. It also knew which pages it wanted initialed without reading. Allowed the small print that poured itself, like sand between the larger rocks. Collins. Mother has a way of arranging rooms to remind you that she is the weather. Vivian Hart manages expectations the way surgeons manage bleeding, immediately, decisively, and with an audience. Since our engagement, she has smiled at me with the kind of warmth expensive chandeliers give off, which is to say not temperature at all. She sent planners who ironed tablecloths with their hands and a list of vendors that read like a genealogical chart. I accepted most of it because peace is a currency and I was rich in denial. The prenup's first 2 sections were reasonable enough for someone who chooses to understand the world as a ledger. Premarital assets stay put. Debts don't get baptized by vows. The 3rd section began to wobble where legalese tries to look polite. It introduced post-marital business participation in sentences that bent like wire and never quite straightened. It sketched a future in which my shares would be advised by neutral parties and escrowed into a shelter that would make family disputes as obsolete as payphones. The shelter's custodian, it turned out, wore Collins' firm on its letterhead. I traced the chain of permissions with a fingernail and watched the ink show me who believed they were building a life and who was building a pipeline. I made tea too strong and let it go cold in a way that felt symbolic and wasteful. The window over my sink frames a slice of sky that refuses to remember anyone's problems. Planes pass through like punctuation. I thought of the first time Colin took me to his office. How the air there smelled like citrus cleaner and tempered glass. How every monitor sang to itself. How his assistant typed Ms. Cole into an email like a form of choreography. I thought of the night we chose a venue because the owner's dog fell asleep on my feet, and we took it as a sign that happiness likes wood floors. On page 9. The font made a private decision and shifted 1 point smaller. Section headings stopped aligning with the table of contents like a calendar that decides to borrow days from a better month. There was a clause about immigration documentation that didn't belong in our story but had been slipped in between governing law and alternative dispute resolution, as if bureaucracy can hide among its cousins. Colin holds a British passport and a green card he treats like a gym membership, something you renew while texting. The clause proposed expedited spousal adjustment coordination and priority employment authorization, phrases that read like software error messages and tasted like metal in my mouth. I stacked my copies into a strict rectangle and set them beside my grandmother's recipe file, which is the only archive that has never lied to me. On a shelf above the file, The photo of my parents cutting the ribbon on the new cold storage bay leaned against the wall in a frame that has survived 3 moves and 1 flood. They look exactly like people who believe paperwork was a tool, not a tactic. I thought of my father on a forklift at dawn in January, air like salt, the sound of pallets clicking into place more reliable than some promises. The wedding itself sat on the calendar like a grin. 3 weeks. We had a tasting scheduled at the venue with napkins in 3 indifferent colors. The caterer wrote emails that managed to be both enthusiastic and relentless. My dress hung on a padded hanger with a way of making the corner of the room look like it had earned its own weather system. I wanted to be the person who could laugh about prenups over champagne and then initial my way into a future that would make accountants sigh with relief. I am also the person who feels the weight of ink when it leans the wrong way. When I flipped the signature packet over to list my questions, the document properties on the cover page winked at me in 8-point gray. Created 1:12 a.m. Author C. Hart. Printed 1:36 a.m. Colin had taken to working late since the engagement, a habit he called getting ahead of the runway. He likes metaphors that involve planes. They imply a destination and a respectful relationship with gravity. He had also asked me, twice, to drop off my driver's license and social security card at his office so the visa folks can pre-flight everything. He said it with the reasonable confidence of a man who files. I gave him scans because convenience is dense as a star when you're in love. I called Fiona, our venue coordinator, to confirm the tasting, and her voicemail introduced itself without apology. Her recorded voice cheerfully reminded me to drop our signed prenup at the office on level 12 of the Hart building, as if wedding logistics and legal paperwork have always shared elevators. I replayed the message twice to see if words can become less themselves if you insist. They cannot. At midnight. I lay awake in a room that wasn't interested in dimming for my benefit. The streetlight cut the wall into bars the color of buttery toast, and I found appreciation for the stupid image because it kept me from crying. I cataloged the people in my life like a patient nurse counts pulses. My mother, who collects recipes and traditions like a curator. My father, who speaks in tight sentences that function like a ladder. My younger brother, Ethan, who can tell you which palate wobbles by ear. And Colin, who is winter-white confident and has a way of making decisions feel preordained. I had learned to love him in short, declarative sentences because he prefers them. Somewhere around 1, the printer in my home office woke itself and chewed paper in its small nocturnal way. I had set it to sleep, but it sometimes coughs when my laptop updates. I stood in the doorway and watched the tray spit a single sheet with a header I recognized despite the blur. Kinsit and Reed, K&R Co-work. After hours access confirmed. The page listed badge IDs and timestamps for a glass-walled co-working suite the firm uses when the main lights go down. Colin's badge had checked in at 12:58 a.m., then again at 1:03, 1:17, and 1:34, a rhythm that matched the birth of the prenup in my hand. The printer had caught a relic from an auto-forward rule I didn't remember setting. Machines can be unfaithful in useful ways. That I stood there in the bluish light with a page that described a man moving through a building while I lay in the dark imagining a life he was designing in a room with cameras, citrus cleaner, and no witnesses that love me. I am not a detective. I do, however, know how to schedule deliveries and cut checks and convince forklifts and vendors to behave on the same morning. I also know who in a building sees everything because they are paid not to appear to see it all. In the morning, I would bring muffins and a polite smile to the K&R co-work concierge desk. I would ask for a copy of last night's access log for our wedding coordinator's compliance checklist, which is not a sentence that has ever existed and is therefore an excellent password. I would confirm whether cameras watch the file room on level 12 where they archive signed originals in gray boxes. I would walk in as a bride, which budgets everyone into underestimating you. And if the cameras saw a page swap, if a contract put to bed became a different document by dawn, I would have the beginning of a story that makes sense without ever asking for a speech. The concierge desk at K&R Co-work smelled like citrus and printer fuser, the precise fragrance of places where paper is taught to impersonate law. I carried a box of blueberry muffins like a passport and a clipboard that wore a fake compliance checklist for wedding vendor onboarding. The receptionist's keyboard kept time. Her badge printer exhaled laminate with the indifference of machines that meant permission. I asked for a visitor badge and a copy of last night's after-hours access log for our coordinator's records, which is not a real sentence anywhere except in rooms that mistake clipboards for authority. The request slid through because weddings are an alibi no one interrogates. The log printed with timestamps like knuckles, 12:58 a.m., 1:03 a.m., 1:17 a.m., 1:34 a.m. beside C, heart, then 1:41 a.m. beside V, heart, guest. My future mother-in-law had been in the building while I was counting streetlight bars on my ceiling. The log also listed a records annex. Level 12 door open for 4 minutes at 1:19 a.m. The annex is where firms tuck gray archive boxes behind a keypad that believes it's important. Cameras cover that hallway with the patient stare of equipment paid to remember. I requested a thumbnail export for our insurance file. The receptionist obliged because forms are more persuasive than adjectives. Elevators prefer silence. Mine watched me in stainless steel. Level 12 presented itself with carpet that swallows footsteps and wall art chosen to calm invoices. A glassed-in file room sat behind frosted logos. Inside, shelves stood in disciplined rows, and a central work table held a large 3-hole punch and a jar of black binder clips, the kind you deploy when a signature packet has learned to repeat itself. On a side card, a stack of discarded printouts offered its own archaeology, draft prenup pages with orphaned footers, a red line where Section 3 had grown teeth, and a slip from a multifunction printer logged to C.Heart, secure print, 1:36 a.m. The paper wore heat like an alibi. Toner lay on the fibers like a late-arriving decision. I photographed the tray code, device ID, and user string, then set the sheets back the way future me would want present me to have done. The security camera in the corner wore a red LED like a heartbeat. I checked the angle and watched it watch me without blinking. A records clerk rolled past with a cart of bankers' boxes that had their own gravity. Her ID badge hung from a lanyard that wanted to be invisible. She parked the cart near the annex door and keyed in with a rhythm that told me she had learned the pad by finger, not by number. The door clicked and revealed rows of Heart client, archives labels, and one shelf tagged KNR, family agreements. The nomenclature was careful enough to be lazy. I memorized the position with the kind of photograph you learn to take with your eyes when phones attract suspicion, back downstairs. The concierge slid me a USB with a polite warning about limited retention. The thumbnails opened on my laptop as a strip of frozen honesty. 1:17 a.m., Colin at the annex keypad. 1:19 a.m., the door opens, Vivian appearing in frame, a rectangle of pages in her hand with a binder clip like a handle. 1:21 a.m., a stack on the center table, the 3-hole punch lever depressed. 1:23 a.m., pages swapped in a neat arc. 1:24 a.m., the old stack clipped and slid into a banker's box. 1:26 a.m., the new stack collated and tapped square against the table, an act of tidiness that would have been domestic if it hadn't been surgical. The camera didn't hear their voices. It didn't need to. The choreography had its own grammar. Back home, I laid the signature packet beside the thumbnails and let incongruities introduce themselves. Section 3, the one about post-marital business participation, shifted 1 point smaller midway, through like a tire losing air. The immigration clause arrived wearing a different font and a kerning pattern that betrayed another template. In the margin, faint and arrogant, a comment balloon ghosted from a hasty PDF flatten. Initials VH with the note, attach ID checklist here, employment authorization document. The bureaucratic bridge from fiancé to shareholder. Someone had meant to tidy the layer before printing. Toner had captured the hesitation that I pulled the document properties again and watched the author field alternate between C.Heart and V.Heart across versions, like a seesaw that forgot which child deserved gravity. The creation time, 1:12 a.m., matched the secure print slip from the file room. The immigration clause referenced a spousal adjustment coordination with corporate counsel routed through Kensett and Reed. The coordinating email, I suspected, already lived on a server that would someday be asked to explain itself to someone who bills in 6-minute increments. The bottom of page 11. Where signatures make rooms quiet, a witness line had been filled in with the block letters of someone who writes their name for cameras. The surname was familiar in the way law firms become incestuous, Reed. Not the partner, but Paige Reed, Vivian's niece, frequently introduced at fundraisers as in pre-law. The notary block bore a seal that feathered like toner instead of biting like metal. I pressed the page against a lamp and looked for the ghost ring on the reverse. Nothing rose. Ink tells you when it means it. I opened a new folder, Prenup, Evidence, and populated it with items that do not tell stories so much as refuse to be argued with. Access log PDF. Camera thumbnails, secure print slip, page scans. Property screenshots, comment balloon capture. And a spreadsheet mapping times to actions to people. Columns calmed the room. They always do. The plan assembled itself. Request full hallway footage. Pull notary journal for the date and time. Ask venue for provenance of the voicemail script tying prenup to level 12. Check building contractor logs for who maintains the 3-hole punch and whether it has a maintenance camera. Ridiculous. But I was in a mood to love ridiculous. By late afternoon, Fiona from the venue replied with an apology that wore professionalism like a shawl. The voicemail script she'd used had been provided by the groom's family. Liaison to streamline deliverables. She attached a PDF with Vivian Hart in the author field and a file name. Wedding_ops_master_V forward a PDF that wore a corporate smell. The bullet point 4 deposit drop-off now contained prenup originals, delivered to KNR. Level 12, Records Annex. As if the courthouse lived between canapes and chair rentals. Evening arrived without sentiment and found me rereading. Section 3 with the attention people usually reserve for bad news. The clause placed Cole Orchard in cold storage into a stability trust administered by a neutral advisory board comprising 2 Kinset and Reed appointees and 1 mutually agreed community fiduciary. The escrow mechanic effectively removed voting control during transitional events, which is what you call marriage when you want to hide a lever. If I signed, my family's company would be stabilized into someone else's definition of responsible at 9:11 p.m. My phone vibrated with a calendar update that assumed compliance. Prenup signing, Friday 4 p.m., level 12. The invite came from Vivian Hart through a distribution list titled Hart Family, Wedding OPS, a phrase that read like a joke until it arranged rooms. I declined with the quiet ferocity of a person moving a chess piece no one else has noticed. The email bounced a polite warning about critical path items. I forwarded it to a folder named Critical. Sure.I printed 1 page from the packet, the immigration clause with its different font and the VH comment ghost, on heavy stock and slid it into a clear sleeve. Then I pulled an old banker's box from my closet labeled Granddad, COCS, and flipped through annual minutes until I found the letter of intent he'd written when he made me a trustee. Keep ownership family run. No management by spouses, firm, or affiliates. Marriages are celebrations, not mergers. His handwriting looked like a tool you sharpen quietly and keep where you can reach it before sleep. I taped 3 notes above my desk, each a sentence short enough to survive a storm. Cameras don't blink. Fonts confess. Toner lies where pressure tells the truth. The printer in the next room exhaled like a tired dog. The lemons on the island kept pretending to be decorative. Morning would be notary journals, building security, and a visit to the records annex with a reason that couldn't be easily refused. I would go in as the bride they expected and collect what process had left on the floor when it tried to become policy. And if the 3-hole punch had left chads in the bin from a page swap at 1:23 a.m., I would take them home in a coin envelope labeled the way accountants label forgiveness. The notary counter at City Hall wore its bureaucracy like a uniform. Plexiglass, date stamps stacked like totems, pins on chains that make you feel young for thinking you can pocket ink. I slid a request across the tray with the calm of someone who has learned to pronounce jurat like a native. The clerk retrieved a hardbound notary journal that smelled faintly of toner and old gum and turned to the date printed on my packet. The line where my name should have lived offered someone else's afternoon. A mail-away affidavit for a vendor on the 15th floor, 2 leases, a lost title transfer. No prenup witnessing, no Paige Reed, no Vivian Hart hovering as initials. A neat diagonal slash cut through the time block where I was allegedly notarized. No signers recorded. The bureaucratic equivalent of a head shake. Outside, the morning had the color of a photocopy left on the dash. I walked 2 blocks to the building security office that manages everything cameras remember and filed a footage preservation request with the kind of haste that reads as courtesy. The access officer printed stills like postcards. The annex keypad at 1:17 a.m. Colin entering. Vivian appearing with a clipped stack. The 3-hole punch depressed at 1:23 a.m. A banker's box accepting outtakes with the deference of furniture. The camera didn't produce audio. The images produced verbs anyway. Back at my kitchen island, I opened wedding_ops_master_v4.pdf and pulled the document XML into a text editor the way you crack a safe with a stethoscope. In the custom properties, a string named replace map listed pairs like a confession. Partner firm, Kinsit and Reed. Deliverable, Prenup originals. Drop point, level 12 records annex. The field history showed an author tag that alternated between v.heart and shared admin, which is either a mistyped Colin or a shared credential wearing a shrug. Autotext had done the rest. Scattering streamline across bullet points until logistics sounded like inevitability that I took the elevator to level 12 carrying a tote bag that said bride in a font designed to excuse questions. The records annex recognized my face in the reflective glass and declined to care. Inside, I walked the aisle to K&R, family agreements, and felt the air change the way rooms change when a plan has already happened inside them. On the second shelf, a combination safe the size of a microwave squatted like punctuation. Its keypad had oil smudges on 2, 0, 1, 7, and 4, a pattern that smells like birthdays when laziness wears a suit. I cleaned a thumb, pressed the most used sequence in 2 permutations, and heard a latch remember obedience. The door opened onto the boring heaven of originals, gray cover sheets, metal fasteners, stamps that bite instead of whisper. In the back, a folder labeled Cole, Prenup. V1 lay with the exhausted dignity of paper that expected retirement. I eased it onto the center table and found Section 3 with its earlier, tamer language. Advisory, not escrow. No neutrality board. Absolutely no immigration clause cross-wired into corporate governance. The notary block bore a wet seal that ghosted onto the reverse like pressure proving it had happened. The witness line listed a building assistant I knew by face and nod, not a niece practicing law in the mirror. The print footer timestamped 7:42 p.m., a sane hour when offices still pretend to be honest that I photographed each page with the reverence of a museum thief who returns things after photographing them. In the bottom of the safe, the banker's box from last night's choreography held the discarded stack with a yellow slip that read superseded. Retain until purge window. Toner edges matched my packet. Hole punch chads littered the cart's bin like confetti from a celebration no one would admit hosting. I palmed a few into a coin envelope because ridiculous proof is often the kind that survives cross-examination. Back home, a grid emerged the way scaffolding emerges when you can finally afford permits. V1 with pressure seal, normal font, sane hour. V3 with toner seal, font shift, immigration graft, VH comment ghost. 1:12 a.m. creation, 1:36 a.m. secure print. Cameras catching the swap. Notary journal refusing to know me. Columns settled my breathing. Rose taught me the plot, at 4:02 p.m. Vivian's calendar invite rerouted itself into my inbox again as if repetition could be strategy. Prenup signing, Friday 4 p.m., level 12. The subject line might as well have been a dare. I created a reply in drafts I did not intend to send and attached 2 images. The wet seal V1 notary ghost ring and the bin of chads under the 3-hole punch. I let the cursor blink over subject. Decline until its tiny metronome felt like an oath. Evening snapped the day, closed with a clean edge. I printed my grandfather's letter of intent and set it beside the V1 images, 2 versions of care separated by a decade and a smell. The lemons on the island pretended to be decorative. The printer behaved. Tomorrow, I would serve a preservation demand. Walk into Kinsit and read with a binder that doesn't apologize. Ask the notary registrar for a certificate that says I was never there. And bring Fiona a cleaner script that puts catering and contracts back in their respective buildings. If the immigration clause wanted to live, it would have to find a home that didn't tunnel through my family's stock. And if the cameras gave me motion clips instead of thumbnails, I would watch 1:23 a.m. in real time and learn whether the person who tapped the stack square at the end was my fiancé or his mother. Either way, fonts had already confessed. The motion clips arrived as polite.mp4s zipped into a folder labeled Annex. Cam. 12B. Each segment a 2-minute witness that never blinks. At 1:17 and 6 seconds a.m., the frame caught Colin at the keypad. At 1 hour 18 minutes and 59 seconds, Vivian slid in, a binder clipped stack face down like a magician palming a card. 1 hour 22 minutes and 41 seconds showed the 3-hole punch dropping its lever, paper confetti spitting into the bin. At 1 hour 23 minutes and 12 seconds, the camera watched a clean crescent of old pages lifted, the new stack slotted. The edges tapped square against the table in a motion precise enough to qualify as signature choreography. 1 hour 24 minutes and 48 seconds, the displaced stack disappeared into a banker's box. 1 hour 26 minutes and 3 seconds, a secure print slip landed on top like a receipt. The clip ended on the tiniest, cruelest detail. A binder clip reattached with the satisfaction of routine. By noon. The notary registrar had issued a sentence that fits in a file and changes whether. Certificate of non-appearance. No entry for my name, my fiancé, or page read on the date and hour stamped on the packet. The commission number on my copy tied to a notary who hadn't notarized anyone in a year. The paper wore pressure. The seal ghosted onto the reverse like proof prefers weight. Kinsit and Reed booked a compliance touchpoint in a glass room that sounded like citrus and policy. I arrived with a binder that didn't apologize. Annex clips, access logs, secure print slips, V1 versus V3 page pairs, wet seal ghost beside toner feather, and a tab that said immigration clause, grafted in a font I chose for pettiness. I arranged the evidence like a ledger rearranging a myth and spoke in nouns. Swap at 1:23 a.m. No notary journal. Comment ghost VH. Font drift, KNR custody. Wedding _ops replace map directing prenup originals to level 12. Terms traveled in the opposite direction of negotiation. No escrow. No neutral board with your appointees. No stability trust that freezes my voting shares. If immigration needs spousal adjustment, it gets a standalone plan routed through an outside specialist with zero touch to coal orchard and cold storage. No data sharing, no board seats, no temporary custodians. Prenup resets to V1 language with wet seal, and any prior iterations are preserved, not recycled. The table absorbed verbs the way would take stain. Policy like sentences that leave fingerprints. On the train home, I opened wedding _ops master _v4 PDF one more time, this time in a metadata tool designed by someone who distrusts defaults. Buried in XMP, a custom property, HardOps thread held a 9-character slug that resolved to an internal chat export, a tidy JSON attachment the PDF had carried like a stowaway. Inside, a message thread titled Citizenship Sprint, timestamped 2 months ago, summarized a strategy in 3 sentences that tasted like metal. Citizenship first. Shares later. Stabilized during transition, board. Swap pages if needed. KNR annex is cleaner after 10. The sender initials match theirs. The file hashed clean. I screen grabbed the hash beside the message because future me is done losing to miscommunications. I saved the export into Prenup, evidence, and printed 1 page on heavy stock so the plan could feel its own weight. On my island, V1 lay beside a certificate of non-appearance, the annex clip stills, and a chat that treated marriage like a workflow. Lemons looked decorative and complicit. At 4:07 p.m. My calendar pinged a new invite I did not accept. Revised signing. Escrow memo walkthrough. I dragged it to a folder called Critical. Sure, and added 1 line to my checklist in ink that digs into paper. Outside counsel for immigration. Tomorrow, 9 a.m., separate rails. Night pressed the window flat. I labeled a coin envelope Annex Chads. 1:23 a.m., and tucked it behind my grandfather's letter of intent where stubbornness lives. The printer stayed quiet. The room did not. In the morning, the chat export goes to my file, and the venue gets a script that puts cake and contracts back on different floors. And if anyone suggests stabilizing a family company with a pen after midnight, I will bring motion clips and a notary's silence and let the toner explain itself. Outside counsel smelled like paper that paid rent. Quiet office, hard chairs, no logo merchandise. I laid out my annex clips, the certificate of non-appearance, the V1 versus V3 page pairs, and the hard ops thread export that said citizenship first, shares later. The immigration specialist rearranged everything into two piles with the mercy of a triage nurse. Immigration on the left, corporate on the right, and wrote in tidy block letters across a legal pad, separate rails. Marriage-based filings would run through her firm. No shared drives, no shared sign-in, no liaison, no access to my family's governance. If Colin needed I-130/I, 485/I, 765, the packets would wear her letterhead and my control. Nothing would live on Kinsit and Reed. It felt like oxygen from the elevator lobby. I sent KNR a preservation demand that didn't blink. Internal hold on all prenup iterations. Annex motion footage, secure print logs, wedding ops PDFs, and any communications binding immigration to corporate control. The subject line was unromantic enough to survive a subpoena. An automated reply announced a litigation hold had been placed. The silence that followed announced a scramble. Fiona answered right away with revisions that made me like her more. Wedding_ops_master_ V5 removed level 12 like a tumor. And vendor drop-offs returned to earth. Venue desk, normal hours. Receipts signed by humans whose names match their badges. She apologized for adopting someone else's process. I filed the apology under receipts, the only folder I trust at lunchtime. My inbox exhaled the worst kind of convenience. A USCIS account notice thanking Hannah Cole for adding a case, followed by a case status alert on a Form I-485 tied to Colin Hart with me listed as responsible sponsor. The portal had helpfully generated a timeline. AG 28 showing representation by KNR immigration affiliates. A draft I-864 affidavit of support populated with my SSN and income. And an I-765 flagged expedite with wedding operations schedule cited as urgency. Submission timestamp 1:41 a.m. The IP on the account creation resolved to Heart Building, guest Wi-Fi. The device fingerprint matched the annex, CAM, 12B sequence I'd already captured. Convenience had committed itself to a timeline that I took screenshots like a stenographer with trust issues, case numbers, A numbers, submission times, IP, device. G, 28 attorney of record, the I-864 bearing my digital signature image pulled from the Visa folks can pre-flight scans I had once sent because love is dense and printers are hungry. The portal showed a representative created account with my email added after the fact. The audit log stamped cust ADD next to my name with the elegance of a tire track that I printed. One page on cardstock, the G28 listing A. Representative I had not hired and slipped it into the binder under a tab titled Unauthorized. Then I drafted 3 filings that know how to stand up in rooms. A G28 revocation removing KNR from my case. A fraud tip with exhibits for USCIS FDNS audit logs. IP, device, 1:41 a.m. submission. And a withdrawal/declination letter for any sponsorship initiated without my hand or voice. Each document wore verbs that don't tremble: revoke, withdraw, report, preserve.in the afternoon. KNR compliance proposed a meeting framed as alignment. I confirmed and set the table in my head before they could. V1 only. No escrow, no neutral board. Immigration on outside counsel rails. Destroy unconsented signature images. Confirm purge of shared credentials. Acknowledge annex swap under letterhead. I added a small surgical condition Warren would have enjoyed. A written apology to the trust, not to me. Because systems learn faster when paper is addressed to the entity they tried to misname. Evening brought the first USCIS portal push that felt like justice. Representative removed, change recorded. 10 minutes later, FDNS opened a ticket with an intake number that sounded like storm season. The portal locked the I-485 to review hold, representation change, and a banner advised that expedite requests require petitioner confirmation on a call I would now schedule. Separate rails had been laid. The train could choose dignity or inertia that I walked the annex Chad's coin envelope over to my scanner like a person carrying a ring. Under magnification, The paper moons lined up with the V3 punch pattern. A few wore toner freckles that matched the grafted immigration clause page. Ridiculous proof had matured into evidence. The kind a cross-exam can't dismiss because paper doesn't blush at T9:03 p.m. A calendar invite I didn't request tried one more time to rearrange my future. Revised signing. Escrow memo walkthrough, mandatory. I declined without theatrics and filed the decline under critical. Sure. Then I made one more list on a yellow pad because yellow pads never lied to my grandfather. Serve holds. Outside counsel retained. USCIS rails set. Prenup reset demanded. Apology to trust in writing. I taped it above my desk beside the 3 lines I keep like a creed. Cameras don't blink. Fonts confess. Toner lies where pressure tells the truth. Morning would be a glassroom table, KNR on one side, and me on the other with a binder that had stopped being shy. I would put V1 beside V3, the annex clips beside the certificate of non-appearance, the Heart Ops chat beside FDNS intake, and the coin envelope in the center like a ridiculous trophy. I would not raise my voice. I would name rails and watch people choose whether they know how to use them. And if anyone suggested streamlining again, I would hand them the USCIS audit log with 1:41 a.m., a guest Wi-Fi IP, and my digitized signature they had taught a printer to impersonate that a wedding is a party. A company is a noun. Citizenship is a process. None of them belong on level 12 at 1:23 a.m. The conference room wore transparency like a costume. Glass on 3 sides. Skyline reflecting a city practiced at pretending it doesn't notice. A tray of water sat on a legal pad, as if hydration could arbitrate. Compliance arrived with laptops that open like declarations. General counsel positioned a pen parallel to the edge of the table with the steadiness of someone who believes geometry can negotiate. I placed my binder down with the gravity of a tool, not a threat, and let paper occupy the room before anyone reached for a euphemism. Evidence learns choreography if you rehearse it. V1 with wet seal went left. V3 with toner feather went right. Annex, cam, 12B motion clips sat in the middle, a neat row of stills like a flipbook that forgot to be shy. Certificate of non-appearance balanced the notary block. Secure print slips matched document properties that whispered 1:12 a.m. and 1:36 a.m. The Heart Ops thread. Export took the corner with the same confidence as a weather alert. Citizenship first. Shares later. And beside it, the USCIS audit froze 1:41 a.m. into a fact. In front, a coin envelope labeled Annex Chads. 1:23 a.m. waited with the absurd dignity of confetti turned into a scalpel. Terms walked in after exhibits. Each one a rail. Prenup reverts to V1 language. No escrow. No neutral board seated by your appointees. My family's company remains governed by its own bylaws, not stabilized under consultancy that smells like custody. Immigration filing moves to outside counsel with no data sharing, no liaison credentials, no KNR portals. Destroy digitized signature images and certify the purge. Preserve all evidence and acknowledge the annex swap under letterhead. Apology to the trust, not to me. Paper teaches better when it addresses the entity you tried to rename. Compliance did the thing honest departments do when their inboxes have taught them humility. They check logs while listening. Their screen mirrored the after-hours access like a tide table. 12:58, 1:03, 1:17, 1:34, annex open 4 minutes. Secure print at 1:36. A separate pane showed document hashes that refused to be identical across versions that pretended to be. An email index surfaced the wedding_ops replace map, the kind of automation that makes mischief sound efficient. In the notes field, someone typed hold acknowledged. And custody of originals confirmed. With the weary precision of a person who can already hear a subpoena being stamped that I did not look at Colin or Vivian in the reflection because glass rewards people who perform. I looked at policy, which was misbehaving. The general counsel conceded improper blending between immigration logistics and corporate governance, the way a dam concedes seepage. Compliance called the annex swap unsanctioned after-hours access and wrote the sentence into minutes that would outlive the hour. A draft remediation plan grew vertebrae. V1 reinstated, annex auditing, badge restrictions. Outside counsel memorialized, credential purge. Acknowledgement letter addressed to the cold trust with a paragraph, that didn't bother to audition for forgiveness. My binder stayed open while a calendar tried. One more time, to choreograph me, signing walkthrough, revised, humming on my phone like a fruit fly. I filed the notification under critical, sure, and returned to the rails, which do not bend. The room shifted when internal audit entered, a laptop under one arm. The stillness of people who have practiced disappointing colleagues. Their first slide did not do theater. It did incidents. This was not the first time, they said without adjectives. Another bride had signed a prenuptial at noon that looked different by midnight. Pages reordered in the same annex. File metadata with the same path that thinks it erases footsteps by repeating them. The clip of a 3-hole punch lever dropping at 1:22 a.m. in a different week wore the same posture as mine. Patterns, once admitted, stopped being accidents. The audit slide moved to controls, separate rails codified. After-hours lockdown. Annex access narrowed to staff daylight. Dual control on originals. Camera retention extended. Template libraries quarantined. The last bullet point had the reluctant courage good fixes have. Client notification window for impacted parties. Which is bureaucrat for call the woman whose marriage paperwork was edited while the building slept. I collected my pages in reverse order because sometimes you make the room watch closure happen. One exhibit at a time until only rails remain. The coin envelope went last, tucked behind my grandfather's letter of intent, where ridiculous proof has learned to become policy. At the door, compliance handed me a written acknowledgement, V1 reinstated, swap admitted, immigration decoupled, digitized signature images purged, letter to trust forthcoming, signed in ink that pressed hard enough to ghost onto the page beneath. Pressure always tells the truth. Evening found me on my kitchen island, which has become a courtroom that smells like lemons. I stacked the acknowledgement beneath the USCIS revocation, the FDNS intake, the notary non-appearance, the annex clips that no longer need me to narrate. The printer stayed quiet, as if it had learned something about ours. The last email of the day carried the weight of an echo. Internal audit CC'd me on a client notification sent to a name I didn't know. Another woman. Another wedding. Another annex at 1:23 a.m. The subject line wore the misplaced politeness of systems that apologize late. Review of prior document handling. Please contact. My inbox held it beside my own week and made a shape out of two events that had believed they could stay isolated. Night made the window honest. I wrote a short list and taped it near the 3 lines that have kept my pulse in range. Finish prenup reset. Sign separate rails retainer. Follow up on other bride's notice. Family companies survive on mundane courage. Truck logs, temperature charts, reconciled ledgers. I added one more line in handwriting that shows when my hand shakes. Marriage only if paper tells the same story at noon and at midnight. Morning would bring the apology to the trust. A clean V1 ready to sign beside a woman who no longer confuses stability with custody. And a phone call to a stranger who deserves to know that cameras don't blink and fonts confess. If there was a next fight, it would be about making policy out of proof, not the other way around. And somewhere on level 12, a 3-hole punch would creak under new supervision. It's been emptied before it could learn to become a confetti cannon again. The letter arrived in a courier sleeve with the humility expensive stationery rarely manages. Acknowledgement to the Cole Family Trust, printed on Kinset and Reed letterhead, signed in ink that pressed hard enough to ghost onto the page beneath. It admitted the annex swap, affirmed V1 reinstated, certified the purge of digitized signatures, and, in a paragraph a court would respect, decoupled immigration from corporate governance. The final line didn't flatter me. It addressed the entity they had tried to rename. We apologize to the Cole Family Trust for unauthorized handling of its documents. Paper had written sorry to the correct noun that we met in a glass room without ceremony. The clean V1 lay between us like a truce that could stand being read aloud. No escrow. No neutral board. My voting shares stayed tethered to bylaws that survived floods and commodity cycles, and the year the compressors died on the same Tuesday the trucks wouldn't start. I initialed where contracts keep their breathing. The notary seal bit deep enough to print a faint ring on the reverse. Pressure told the truth. Noon and midnight would say the same thing now. The immigration rails held. My outside counsel opened I, 130/I, 485/I, 765 packets under her letterhead with a checklist that behaved like oxygen. No shared portals. No liaison accounts. No building guest Wi-Fi. At 1:41 a.m., Collins submitted his biographicals in a waiting room that smelled like hand sanitizer and fluorescent intent. I signed as petitioner in person, watched the ink sink, and kept a copy stamped in the top corner with a clerk's initials that snapped like a taut string. Process, restored, isn't romantic. It's clean to AT home. The island wore its courtroom calm. I added the apology letter to receipts, clipped behind my grandfather's letter of intent where stubbornness lives. Then I dialed the number internal audit had CC'd. Another bride. Another week where 1:23 a.m. pretended to be a workflow. Madison Price answered with the voice people use when they've learned to ration rage. Her prenup had acquired a debt clause while she slept. It moved a fiancé's startup loans into marital stability exposure. The annex footage showed the same choreography. 3-hole punch lever down, stack swapped, tap square. I emailed her the phrase that had saved me, separate rails, and a template preservation demand that treats euphemism like a laminate you can peel that we compared notes like mechanics around a stall. Toner feather versus ghost ring, V1 versus midnight print. Badge logs, notary journal silence. Patterns stopped being insult and turned into standard operating procedure that someone had invented because it worked. Madison scheduled a meeting with compliance. I forwarded her the Heart Ops chat where citizenship first, shares later had been proposed as if borders and board seats were cousins. If this had a name, it was convenience vandalized into policy. The fix would need to be louder than an apology. Evening arrived, trying to be ordinary and failing. My phone buzzed with an email that wore urgency like a costume. USCIS expedite reminder. Employment authorization pending. Triggered by a representative account I had already revoked. The header showed KNR Immigration Affiliates as preparer. The IP resolved to heart building, guest. The timestamp flirted with after hours again. The portal, however, displayed my revocation in bold and a status line that refused to be moved. Review hold. Representation change. It was like watching a tidal pool still trying to wave after the tide has committed elsewhere. I pulled the audit for the notification and found a residual cron in a Heart Ops scheduler still pointing at my case, spitting reminders into the world like a machine that hadn't heard it had been turned off. A small thing, except small things are how big things stay standing. I screenshotted the job ID, the endpoint, the headers, and added them to FDNS with the kind of caption that never apologizes. Residual automation attempting to act as representative post-revocation. 10 minutes later, the scheduler job died in a log, and a ticket opened with an engineer's initials and the phrase Force Disable plus Purge Tokens. Separate rails had teeth now. I cleaned the island like a closing argument. Annex clip squared. V1 on top. Apology to trust tucked where it could be found on a rainy day. I printed Madison's preservation demand and wrote file across the top in the handwriting I reserve for serious nouns. The lemons pretended to be decorative. I believed them for once. Night put an even layer over the window. I added one more line to the creed on my fridge, no signatures after midnight. Under it, I wrote the condition that would govern everything forward. Marriage only if paper tells the same story at noon and at night. I took a photograph because rituals choose their own witnesses. Morning would bring compliance's final memo, KNR's apology sent to the trust, and Madison's meeting where cameras would do what they always do. Remember, if anyone suggested a stability workaround again, I would slide the wet seal V1 across the table and let the ghost ring do the lecturing. And somewhere on level 12, a 3-hole punch would squeak under new rules. It's been emptied before confetti could learn to be a policy again. Compliance's memo arrived like a hardware manual, thin, precise, built to survive drawers. Daylight-only access to the annex dual control for any original. 2 humans, 2 signatures, 1 camera pointed at a table that now mattered. After-hours lockdown bound to the badge system. Liaison credentials retired and quarantined like a bad plug-in. Template libraries versioned and sealed. Camera retention extended from 30 to 180 days. In the appendix, a sentence that felt like a hinge. Family agreements shall not be handled by departments with immigration or corporate control matters. Separate rails had become rule, not favor. The apology to the Cole family trust moved from words to ritual. A messenger delivered an envelope on heavy stock. Inside, an attestation with hash IDs for the signature image purge and the annex hold, notarized with a seal that bit deep enough to ghost the next page. Pressure confessed. Toner stayed in its lane. I slid the letter into receipts and felt the binder's weight redistribute into something that behaved like relief. Madison texted from a glass room much like the one I'd sat in. Her V1 restored. The midnight debt clause retired with all the ceremony of a trash icon. A written acknowledgement addressed to her trust, not her patience. She sent a still from their annex camera, another three-hole punch caught mid-lever, a bin of paper moons now evidence instead of confetti. Patterns, once named, start paying rent. Outside counsel kept immigration on the left-hand track. I could finally breathe around. I-130/I-485/I, 765 lived behind her login. G-28 on file bore her firm's letterhead and my wet signature. The portal status line held steady at Review Hold. Representation change completed. The expedite banner had vanished like a guilty pop-up. For the first time in weeks, process sounded like a metronome, not an intrusion alarm. I cleaned the kitchen as if policy could be polished. V1, apology, compliance memo, stacked. Annex clips, notary non-appearance, hard ops chat, archived. The lemons got to be decorative without irony. I wrote one more line on the card stuck under my magnet wrench. Daylight only. Furniture-level rules survive storms. Then the portal tried a trick it hadn't earned. USCIS pinged my inbox with a case update. Priority review requested banner, stamped 5 minutes past midnight. The prep line credited an authorized representative my file no longer recognized. The IP belonged to a shared cloud relay. The user agent mimicked a mobile browser. The header carried a stale hard ops token that should have died with the scheduler. Automation has a talent for stubbornness. The immediately familiar choreography took over. I pulled the request ID, the token hash, the endpoint, and the header set. Matched the timestamp to the server log outside counsel had set to mirror my case. Saw the call bounce, fail, and retry like a ghost key on a locked door. I forwarded the packet to FDNS with the subject line, residual actor attempting post-revocation action, deny, and log. 10 minutes later, the portal posted its own spine. Priority review request denied. No active representative. A back-end engineer added a note that belonged on my fridge. Force revoked remaining tokens. Disabled legacy hooks. Audit trail preserved that I didn't celebrate. I wrote, no signatures after midnight, under daylight only, and taped the card beside the creed I've been building like a fence. Cameras don't blink. Fonts confess. Toner lies where pressure tells the truth. Separate rails. Daylight only to NO signatures after midnight. The house agreed in small ways. Kettle. Plate. The familiar complaint of wood under a dish. The binder didn't purr, it rested. Outside, the street lamp did what street lamps do. Make ordinary possible. Morning would be signatures on the compliance memo. A notice of policy change to vendors, and a meeting with the trade association where I intended to say dual control isn't a luxury out loud. It would also be a call with Madison to share what to watch for when systems forget their own off switch, and somewhere in a server's cool quiet. A dead token would sit in a log that now knew the difference between help and handle. Compliance memos don't go viral. They go everywhere. By noon, the daylight-only/dual control policy hit inboxes in a cascade. Subject lines that sounded like seatbelts clicking. Annex access, daylight only. Originals, 2 humans, 1 camera. Liaison credentials, retired. A footer line did more work than an apology. Family agreements shall not be processed by departments handling immigration or corporate control. Separate rails had graduated from a rescue to a rule, the trade association squeezed us into an agenda between forklift safety and OSHA ventilation. I carried a one-pager that refused adjectives. Dual control, camera retention 180 days. No after-hours originals, template quarantine. Vendor drop-offs, front desk only. And a slide that showed a 3-hole punch mid-lever with the caption, if you hear this at 1:23 a.m., you have a policy problem. Heads nodded with the resigned gratitude of people who know they are inheriting a fix and not a bill that we pushed a vendor bulletin to venues and planners. 2. Cake and contracts live on different floors, in polite typography. Fiona printed it, taped it beside her seating chart. and sent me a photo where escort cards and ethics finally shared a wall without touching. The last inevitable stabilization spin tried its luck through a lifestyle blog that loves linen and euphemism. A profile of Vivian framed the annex as legacy safeguarding, the Midnight Prince as time zone accommodation, and the prenup edits as literacy for love. The headline held hands with nonsense. The body text bumped against our compliance memo and died on contact. The comments section learned a new tone, dual control trending as a phrase you could say at brunch and not sound like a cop. Then a USCIS notice arrived that did not need rescue. Case update. Biometrics appointment scheduled. The header listed outside counsel as the representative. The submission time sat confidently at 2:14 p.m. with the field office we actually use, the way process sounds when it's daylight and boring. No mystery IPs, no ghost tokens, no priority, arriving as a favor disguised as urgency. Colin forwarded the notice with a plain got it, no emoji, no escalation, like a man who has learned the value of governance that doesn't flirt with the night that I printed the appointment letter and slid it behind receipts with an ease that felt like air clearing. The binder was heavy, but the weight had changed species. It no longer hummed like a live wire. It sat like a ledger that balances. That evening, I walked the orchard's cold storage aisle with my father, the fans thrumming their metronome, the thermograph ticking a line that never lies. He didn't ask for a speech. He asked if the paper tells the same story at noon and at night. I told him it did now. He tapped the steel wall with two knuckles, a gentle, practical applause, and pointed at the clip holding a work order to a rack, two signatures in blue, a timestamp that wasn't shy, a note that said daylight only, in a hand I recognized as the manager's dipped on the drive home. Madison texted a photo of her signed V1, the ghost ring visible under a kitchen light. She captioned it, "No midnight, ever." I saved the image because a good fix is contagious and screenshots are our time's folk memory, at 8:03 p.m. The USCIS portal pushed one more line of decency. Representative change complete, legacy hooks. Disabled. The engineer added a smiling one-word commit note, untangled, too. A log that will never be public and doesn't need to be. I wrote. One more card for the magnet on my fridge. The creed now a stack you could hand to anyone who ever mistook convenience for policy. Cameras don't blink. Fonts confess. Toner lies where pressure tells the truth. Separate rails. Daylight only. No. Signatures after midnight. Marriage only if paper tells the same. Story at noon and at night. The lemons got to be just lemons. The island smelled like tea instead of toner. In the quiet, I could hear the small domestic proofs, cutlery settling. The compressor's breath, doing what good systems do when you finally stop making them improvise. Tomorrow, I would choose a dress without thinking about level 12, sign a vendor receipt at 2 in the afternoon, and send a file to our outside counsel under a subject line that has never ruined anything. Biometrics confirmation, received. And then, because it was overdue, I would decide whether a wedding still felt like the right noun. I didn't cancel the wedding. I resized it until it fit truth. The guest list shed acquaintances the way trees shed what they can't carry into winter. The venue lost the chandelier room and kept the courtyard where daylight refuses to lie. Contracts arrived at 2 in the afternoon with 2 signatures in blue and a photograph of the pen pressed to the page, because sometimes you keep souvenirs that look like procedures. Fiona initialed each line with the neat gravity of someone who has learned to separate cake from contracts as a matter of policy, not taste. Colin came to the conversation with a posture that had retired from theater. He signed V1 beside me, without commentary, and watched the notary seal bite deep enough to leave a ghost ring visible under the kitchen light. He stopped sending walkthroughs and started sending receipts. We chose an outside immigration timeline that speaks in business hours and the kind of patience that learns to be a habit. He apologized to the trust on paper that now lives behind glass in a folder labeled receipts. Not in my messages where amnesia goes to breed. That I wrote a letter to my future self the day before we mailed the invitations. It was not poetic. It was policy disguised as affection, rules for us, if we're lucky. No signatures after midnight. No liaisons. Daylight only. Keep separate rails. If a system calls something help, ask who gets the receipt. If paper tells one story at noon and a different one at night, we choose noon and cancel the night. If either of us forgets, The house remembers that I tucked the letter behind my grandfather's letter of intent, spine to spine. Two square hands sharing a shelf. The day of biometrics came with boring weather and a field office smell that declines to be improved by adjectives. We brought a folder with numbered tabs like students who have decided to enjoy competence. The clerk stamped the corner of our appointment letter. The ink sank into paper in a way toner can only imitate. The scanner took Colin's fingerprints. The camera captured him with the expression of a person who has learned the useful peace of standing still. Outside, the sunlight did what sunlight does, made everything honest and a little unromantic. That night, the USCIS portal whispered an update with the dignity of a clock. Biometrics applied. Case is being actively reviewed. The representative line named outside counsel. The timestamp read 3:02 p.m. like a metronome that had finally chosen the beat we live on. I printed the page and slid it into receipts behind the apology to the trust that we kept the courtyard. We kept text that said, "On my way," instead of strategies that tried to rename custody as stability. We kept the binder because some romances are safer next to evidence. We kept a 3-hole punch at home because it belongs in a drawer, not in a plot. My father walked me down a path of brick that had learned to be level. He did not ask for guarantees. He asked if the paper still told the same story at noon and at night. I said it did. He nodded at the caterer's clipboard as if to bless the shared religion of signatures and daylight that we didn't exchange vows about forever. We exchanged boundaries. Colin promised to treat process as a room we both clean. I promised to knock when I get impatient with locked doors. We both promised to name help correctly and to invite proof the way some people invite music. When we said "I do," the registrar would have approved our workflow. My grandmother would have approved our tone. After the toast, I went home and placed the courtyard receipt and biometrics notice under a magnet shaped like a wrench. The lemons finally got eaten, zest in cake, juice in tea. The kitchen lost the smell of toner and remembered the smell of heat. Weeks later, a small envelope arrived with the kind of administrative joy that doesn't photograph well. ED approved. The letter fit in my palm like a verdict that had learned to be gentle. We took a walk without discussing level 12. The city did its part. Crosswalks that don't time their drama to our pulse. A breeze that doesn't care about our nouns that I wrote one last line under the creed on my fridge. Make ordinary difficult to steal. Then I pressed the card flat with the magnet and let the room become itself. The binder stayed on the shelf within reach, not because I expect storms, but because houses that can stand an audit sleep well. Noon, night, same story. That was the wedding gift we chose to keep. Thank you for watching this story on True Tales Hub. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss our next story that we post new tales twice a day, and each one comes with unexpected twists you won't see coming.